Another shift becoming increasingly visible across financial services concerns operational resilience. So over the past several years, regulatory expectations around resilience have evolved significantly. Historically, resilience was often viewed primarily as an operational or technological concerns. It was addressed through things like infrastructure reliability, system redundancy, and incident response processes. Those elements remain important and critical. However, regulatory thinking has expanded the concept considerably. As you will imagine, operational resilience is now being framed not as an operational capability only, but increasingly as a governance responsibility. Across supervisory communications and regulatory frameworks, there is growing emphasis on the role of senior management and boards in understanding and overseeing resilience risk. So, institutions are expected to identify important business services. They are expected to understand operational dependencies supporting those services. And they are expected to ensure that disruption can be managed within clearly defined tolerance levels. These expectations move resilience firmly into the governance domain. From an orientation perspective, therefore, this shift has important implications. One, operational resilience can no longer be treated solely as a technology or an operations matter. It increasingly requires board-level understanding of how critical services depend on complex operational ecosystems. These ecosystems often include things like technology, infrastructure, cloud, platforms, third-party providers, data systems, for instance, and operational processes that span multiple functions. So when disruptions occur, the root cause may appear technical. A system fails, a provider experiences an outage, a cyber incident disrupts operations. But when these events are examined closely, the deeper issues are often structural. The operations may not have had clear visibility into dependencies supporting critical services, for instance. Escalation pathways may not have been designed to move information quickly into the right decision makers. Or governance oversight may not have fully understood how operational complexity had evolved over time. So, in other words, what appears initially as a technical disruption may in fact reflect a governance design challenge. From an executive perspective, this creates an important calibration question, which is, does the organization's governance structure provide clear visibility into operational dependencies that are supporting most important services? Do senior leaders and board genuinely understand where operational fragility exists? And if a major disruption were to occur, would escalation pathways move quickly enough to support decisive action? These are governance questions, and they are becoming increasingly central to regulatory expectations. So, from an orientation perspective, the terrain signal is clear. Operational resilience is no longer simply about technical robustness. It is about how governance structures understand, oversees, and respond to operational complexity, because resilience failures rarely begins as purely technical problems. More often, they begin with gaps in governance visibility, gaps in escalation clarity, or even gaps in understanding how institutional systems and dependencies have evolved over time. And when those gaps exist, disruption can expose vulnerabilities that governance structure were not fully designed to anticipate, which is why resilience increasingly is not just an operational capability. It is a governance design question. And in those moments, the issue is not simply whether systems can recover, it is whether organizations has oriented itself properly to the complexity of the terrain in which it now operates.